The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Maple Street as Rob Hayes knelt beside the weathered fence separating his backyard from his neighbor's meticulously maintained garden. At 48, the calloused hands of the former teacher, forced into early retirement by budget cuts, moved with practiced precision as if this work had become his primary profession. His 16-year-old son Tyler sat nearby, holding the rusty toolbox that had become their weekend companion, much like poverty had wrapped itself around their lives. Next door, Katherine Johnson emerged from her rental house carrying iced tea, her simple clothes somehow still elegant, unlike a retired nurse seeking quiet as her introduction suggested. "You really don't need to keep fixing my fence, Rob. I've already troubled you and your son enough," she called softly, though her grateful smile silently hoped for the opposite. "Honestly, Mrs. Johnson, this isn't any trouble at all." Rob accepted the iced tea with hands that still carried sawdust from his morning shift at the lumber yard. The cold glass felt like luxury against his weathered palms, a small comfort in days that had become an endless cycle of work and worry. Katherine settled onto her back steps, maintaining the careful distance she'd kept since moving to Maple Street 6 months ago, close enough to be neighborly, but far enough to preserve whatever privacy she was protecting. Tyler glanced up from the toolbox, studying their neighbor with the sharp observation skills teenagers develop when they learn early that adults don't always tell the truth. Something about Mrs. Johnson had always puzzled him. The way she held herself, the quality of her clothes despite their simplicity. The fact that she'd chosen this modest rental in a working-class neighborhood when she could clearly afford better. "The fence has been broken for 3 years," Katherine said, watching Rob examine the rotted post with professional assessment. "The previous tenant just learned to live with it. I never expected anyone to actually fix it." "Dad fixes everything," Tyler offered, a note of pride mixing with something that might have been embarrassment. "Makes more sense than paying someone else to do what you can learn yourself." Rob shot his son a look that carried both gratitude and gentle warning. Tyler had been struggling lately with the gap between their circumstances and those of his classmates, the subtle shame that came with wearing second-hand clothes and bringing homemade lunches to school. The boy was smart enough to understand their situation, but still young enough to feel the sting of it daily. "Your father's teaching you valuable skills," Katherine observed, and something in her voice suggested she understood more about necessity than her appearance might indicate. "There's dignity in being able to take care of things yourself." The afternoon passed in comfortable silence, punctuated by the steady rhythm of Rob's work and the occasional question from Tyler about proper technique. Katherine remained on her steps, occasionally offering drinks or snacks, but mostly just providing the kind of quiet companionship that had become rare in both their lives. As the sun began to set, Rob stepped back to admire the repaired section of fence. The wood was mismatched and the construction wasn't perfect, but it was solid and would last another decade with proper care. Tyler packed the tools with the methodical attention his father had taught him, each item returning to its designated place in the worn toolbox. "How much do I owe you?" Katherine asked, reaching for the purse that sat beside her on the steps. "Nothing," Rob replied automatically, the response programmed by years of his own father's lessons about helping neighbors. "It's what people do." Katherine's smile carried a sadness that Tyler noticed but didn't understand. "Not in my experience," she said softly. "But thank you, both of you." Walking back to their house, Tyler carried the toolbox while Rob gathered the remaining materials. Their small home felt even smaller after spending the afternoon in Katherine's spacious yard. But it was theirs, and that mattered more than square footage or updated appliances. "She's different from other people around here," Tyler said as they stored the tools in their cramped garage. "Not bad different, just different." Rob nodded, having noticed the same thing. Catherine Johnson carried herself like someone accustomed to space and options, yet she'd chosen to live quietly among people who had neither. There was a story there, but Rob had learned that everyone deserved their privacy, especially people who seemed to be running from something. The following Saturday brought another repair request. Catherine's back gate had come off its hinges during the week's storm. Rob and Tyler arrived to find her, wrestling with the heavy wooden structure, her face flushed with frustration and what looked like genuine distress. "Let me get that," Rob said, lifting the gate with ease while Tyler positioned himself to help with the hinges. Storm damage can be tricky. Sometimes it's better to replace the hardware entirely. As they worked, Catherine watched with the attention of someone genuinely interested in learning. She asked questions about the process, took mental notes about the tools required, and even helped hold pieces in place when Rob needed an extra hand. The interaction felt natural, like the kind of neighborhood cooperation that had built communities for generations. "I should learn to do this myself," Catherine said, examining the new hinges Rob had installed. "I can't keep depending on your kindness every time something breaks." "Learning takes time," Rob replied, testing the gate's swing. "Besides, everyone needs help sometimes. The trick is being willing to ask for it." Tyler looked between the adults, sensing undercurrents in the conversation that he couldn't quite identify. His father had always been generous with neighbors, but there was something different about his interactions with Mrs. Johnson. Not romantic, Tyler would have recognized that, but something that suggested a deeper understanding of struggle and resilience. Over the following weeks, the repair requests became more frequent, but also more collaborative. Catherine began purchasing her own tools, asking Rob to teach her basic maintenance skills rather than simply fix things for her. Tyler found himself included in these informal lessons, becoming the student alongside their neighbor as Rob demonstrated proper techniques for everything from caulking windows to replacing light fixtures. The arrangement benefited everyone involved. Catherine gained practical skills she'd never needed before, Rob found purpose in teaching again, and Tyler discovered that their neighbor was genuinely interested in his thoughts and opinions about everything from school to his future plans. The three of them developed the easy rhythm of people who'd found something valuable in each other's company. It was during one of these Saturday afternoon sessions that Catherine made a comment that would later take on significant meaning. They were replacing a section of her front porch railing, and Tyler had asked why she'd moved to their neighborhood instead of somewhere newer and more convenient. "Sometimes you need to step away from your old life to figure out who you really are," Catherine replied, her hand steady as she held the board in place for Rob to secure. "I spent too many years being the person other people expected me to be. Now I'm trying to learn who I am when nobody's watching." Rob understood that kind of reinvention. His own identity had been thoroughly scrambled when the school district eliminated his position, forcing him to rebuild his sense of purpose and worth from scratch. Teaching had been more than his job. It had been his calling, his identity, his contribution to the world. Without it, he'd had to learn new ways to measure his value as a person. "It's harder than it sounds," he said, testing the stability of the railing. "Starting over, I mean, especially when you're not sure what you're starting over as." Catherine nodded with the understanding of someone who'd wrestled with the same questions. "But also liberating in ways you don't expect. When you stop trying to be what others want, you discover possibilities you never knew existed." Tyler listened to this exchange with growing curiosity about their neighbor's mysterious past. Mrs. Johnson spoke like someone who'd had significant experiences, made important decisions, lived a life bigger than the modest rental house would suggest. Yet she seemed genuinely content with her current circumstances, as if she'd chosen simplicity rather than had it imposed upon her. The first crack in Catherine's carefully constructed privacy came on a rainy Thursday evening when Tyler was walking home from his part-time job at the grocery store. He saw Mrs. Johnson through her kitchen window, standing perfectly still while holding what appeared to be a framed photograph. Even from a distance, he could see that she was crying, not the gentle tears of nostalgia, but the kind of deep, silent sobbing that comes from a place of profound loss. Tyler hesitated at his own front gate, torn between respecting her privacy and offering comfort. The decision was made for him when Catherine looked up and saw him watching. Their eyes met through the window, and Tyler saw something in her expression that made him understand why she'd been hiding in their quiet neighborhood. The next morning, Catherine appeared at their door with a coffee cake and an explanation that felt both honest and incomplete. "I wanted to apologize if I seemed upset last night. Tyler, I saw you outside and realized I might have worried you." "Is everything okay?" Rob asked, accepting the cake with the careful politeness he reserved for delicate situations. "As okay as these things get," Catherine replied. "I lost someone important to me, and sometimes the grief catches up unexpectedly. I didn't mean to make it your concern." Tyler watched this exchange with growing understanding. Mrs. Johnson wasn't just hiding from her past, she was grieving it. The careful distance she maintained, the way she seemed grateful for their company but reluctant to fully engage, the sadness that sometimes flickered across her face when she thought no one was looking. It all made sense now. "Grief has its own timeline," Rob said gently. "People who haven't been through it think you should get over it according to some schedule, but it doesn't work that way." Catherine's composure wavered slightly at his understanding tone. "You sound like you know something about it." "Lost my wife 4 years ago," Rob replied simply. "Cancer. Tyler and I learned that grief isn't something you get over. It's something you learn to carry." The admission hung in the air between them, creating a new level of understanding that shifted the foundation of their friendship. Catherine looked at Tyler with fresh eyes, seeing not just a helpful teenager, but a young man who'd learned about loss earlier than most. Tyler, meanwhile, recognized something familiar in their neighbor's carefully controlled sadness. "I'm sorry," Catherine said, and Tyler heard layers of meaning in those 2 words. "I didn't know you'd both been through something like that. People don't wear their losses on their sleeves around here," Rob replied. "Everyone's fighting battles that don't show." This conversation marked a turning point in their relationship. Catherine began joining them for occasional dinners, sharing stories about her past that were carefully edited but increasingly personal. She spoke about growing up wealthy but isolated, about making choices she regretted, about learning too late that money couldn't solve the problems that actually mattered. Tyler found himself genuinely enjoying these evenings. Mrs. Johnson was funny in an unexpected way, with sharp observations about human nature and a dry sense of humor that reminded him of his mother. She also asked real questions about his plans for college, his interests, his thoughts about the world, treating him like his opinions mattered rather than just being polite to Rob's kid. Rob watched these interactions with quiet satisfaction. Tyler had been withdrawn since losing his mother, struggling with a combination of grief and anger that made forming new relationships difficult. Seeing his son open up to Catherine felt like a small miracle, proof that healing was possible even when it seemed impossible. The comfortable routine they'd established lasted until a Tuesday afternoon in early November, when Tyler made a discovery that changed everything. He'd been researching colleges online when a news article caught his attention. Something about a high-profile divorce case involving a tech billionaire named Richard Sterling and his estranged wife. The woman in the accompanying photograph was unmistakably their neighbor, though she looked different in the professional headshot. More polished, more distant, wearing the kind of jewelry that Tyler had learned to recognize as seriously expensive. The article described Catherine Sterling as a prominent socialite and philanthropist who'd recently disappeared from public view during contentious divorce proceedings. Tyler stared at the screen, his mind racing through the implications of what he'd discovered. Mrs. Johnson wasn't a retired nurse. She was a billionaire hiding from the media circus surrounding her divorce. Everything about her presence in their neighborhood suddenly made sense, but it also felt like a betrayal of the trust they'd been building over the past months. The article included several quotes from older interviews with Catherine Sterling, including one that made Tyler's stomach clench with recognition. "I believe people create their own circumstances through their choices and work ethic. Those who find themselves in difficult situations usually have only themselves to blame." Another quote was even worse. "We have a responsibility to set an example for the lower classes, to show them what's possible through discipline and proper values. I don't believe in enabling dependency through handouts." Tyler felt sick reading these words, imagining them coming from the woman who'd been sharing dinners with his family, who'd listened to his father talk about losing his job and struggling to make ends meet. Had she been silently judging them the entire time? Was their friendship some kind of social experiment for her amusement? The worst part was another quote about her daughter. "Emma has been raised to understand that our family operates by different standards. She knows that rules apply differently to people of our position, and that she has both privileges and responsibilities that come with our status." Tyler closed the laptop and sat in stunned silence, processing the collision between the woman he'd come to care about and the person revealed in these articles. The Catherine Johnson who taught him about fence repair and listened to his college plans seemed like a completely different person from Catherine Sterling, who spoke about lower classes and different standards with casual superiority. When Rob came home from work, Tyler was still sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing and trying to figure out how to share what he'd learned. His father looked tired but hopeful, the way he always looked after days when Catherine had stopped by to chat or ask for help with some small project. "You okay?" Rob asked, hanging his jacket on the back of a chair and starting the familiar routine of preparing their simple dinner. "Dad, I need to tell you something about Mrs. Johnson," Tyler said, his voice carefully controlled. "Something I found online." Rob paused in opening a can of soup, hearing something in his son's tone that suggested serious trouble. "What kind of something?" Tyler opened the laptop and turned it toward his father, watching Rob's face as he read the article and studied the photographs. The transformation in his father's expression was painful to witness, confusion giving way to recognition, then hurt, then anger. "She's been lying to us," Tyler said when Rob finished reading. "Everything she told us about being a nurse, about wanting quiet, it's all fake. She's a billionaire hiding from her divorce." Rob read through the quotes again, his jaw tightening with each dismissive comment about people like themselves. The woman who'd sat at their kitchen table eating homemade soup had once publicly stated that poor people deserved their circumstances. The neighbor who'd seemed grateful for their help had previously described their kindness as enabling dependency. "Maybe there's an explanation," Rob said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. "People change. Maybe she's different now. Or maybe she's slumming it for entertainment," Tyler replied, his anger growing as he spoke. "Maybe we're just her charity project, or her way of feeling good about herself." The possibility hung between them like a poison cloud. Rob thought about all the afternoons spent teaching Catherine basic skills, all the dinners where she'd seemed genuinely interested in their lives, all the moments when he'd felt like they were building something meaningful. Had it all been performance? Had she been studying them like interesting specimens while secretly judging their circumstances? That evening, neither of them felt like cooking. They ordered pizza and ate in uncomfortable silence, both processing the implications of Tyler's discovery. Rob found himself replaying conversations with Catherine, looking for signs of deception or condescension that he might have missed. Tyler stared at his phone, reading more articles about the Sterling family and feeling increasingly betrayed by their neighbors' elaborate fiction. The next morning brought a knock at their door. Catherine stood on their front step holding a plate of homemade muffins, wearing the same simple clothes and genuine smile that had characterized all their interactions. Looking at her now, knowing what Tyler had discovered, Rob felt like he was seeing a stranger wearing a familiar mask. "Good morning," Catherine said, offering the muffins with the same warmth she'd always shown. "I tried a new recipe and thought you might like to test them for me." Rob accepted the plate but didn't invite her in, a departure from their usual routine that Catherine noticed immediately. "Is everything all right?" Tyler appeared behind his father, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes carrying an anger that made Catherine take a step back. "We know who you are, Mrs. Sterling," he said quietly. "We know about the divorce, about the money, about everything you said in those interviews." The color drained from Catherine's face as she realized her carefully constructed privacy had crumbled. She looked between Rob and Tyler, seeing the hurt and anger in their expressions, understanding that she'd lost something precious through her deception. "I can explain," she began, but Tyler cut her off with a bitter laugh. "Explain what? How you've been lying to us for months? How you think poor people deserve to be poor? How you raised your daughter to believe she was better than everyone else?" His voice grew louder with each question, months of growing trust transforming into betrayal. Rob put a hand on Tyler's shoulder, trying to moderate his son's anger while struggling with his own feelings of deception. "Tyler, let her talk." "Why?" Tyler demanded, turning his anger toward his father. "So she can lie to us some more? So she can explain how helping the lower classes makes her feel better about herself?" Catherine flinched at the quote, recognizing her own words being used as weapons against her. "Those interviews, they were from a long time ago. I was a different person then." 3 years ago. Tyler shot back. "You said those things 3 years ago, and you've been pretending to be someone else ever since you moved here." The confrontation was drawing attention from other neighbors, and Catherine looked around nervously before focusing back on Rob and Tyler. "Please, can we talk about this privately? There are things you don't understand about my situation." "Like what?" Rob asked, his voice steady but cold. "Like how you've been studying us, like how our friendship has been some kind of social experiment?" "No," Catherine said desperately. "It's nothing like that. Everything between us has been real. I needed to get away from who I used to be." Tyler laughed harshly. "By pretending to be a retired nurse? By lying about everything?" "I lied about my background, yes, but not about who I am now," Catherine replied, tears starting to form in her eyes. "The person you've gotten to know. That's real. That's who I'm trying to become." "Built on a foundation of lies," Rob said quietly. "How are we supposed to trust anything about you when you've been deceiving us from the beginning?" Catherine looked between them, seeing the damage her deception had caused, and understanding that simple explanations wouldn't repair the trust she'd broken. "I lost my daughter," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Emma died in a car accident 8 months ago, and I realized that everything I'd taught her, everything I believed about life and people and worth, it was all wrong." The admission hung in the air, and Tyler felt his anger waver slightly at the pain in her voice. But the betrayal was too fresh, the hurt too deep for sympathy to take hold immediately. "So, you decided to play poor person?" Tyler asked, his voice still hard despite the crack in his resolve. "You thought you'd learn how the other half lives. I thought I'd learn how to be a decent human being," Catherine replied, her composure finally breaking. "I spent 20 years believing that money made me better than other people, teaching my daughter that she was special because of her bank account instead of her character. and she died believing those lies. Rob felt something shift in his chest at her words, but Tyler wasn't ready to let go of his anger. So this is all about making yourself feel better, about assuaging your guilt. This is about learning to be the kind of person my daughter should have had as a mother. Catherine said, tears flowing freely now. You and your father, you've shown me what real strength looks like, what genuine kindness means. I've been trying to become worthy of the friendship you offered by lying to us. Tyler repeated, though his voice had lost some of its edge. By protecting you from the circus that follows me everywhere else. Catherine replied, I'm in the middle of a divorce that's made me a target for every tabloid and gossip site in the country. If people knew I was here, this neighborhood would be overrun with photographers and reporters. I was trying to protect your privacy, not exploit it. Rob studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or performance. What he saw was exhaustion, grief, and what appeared to be genuine regret. The anger that had sustained him since Tyler's discovery began to transform into something more complicated. The things you said in those interviews, Rob said carefully. About people like us. Did you mean them? Catherine closed her eyes, clearly struggling with the weight of her past words. Yes, she admitted. I meant them when I said them. I believed that people who struggled financially had somehow failed, that poverty was a choice or a character flaw. I was wrong about everything. What changed? Tyler asked, his anger finally giving way to curiosity. Emma? Catherine replied simply. My daughter was driving drunk when she died. She hit a tree going 90 miles per hour because she believed the rules didn't apply to her. Because I taught her that money made her special, that she was above consequences. She died because of the values I gave her. The silence that followed was heavy with grief and recognition. Rob thought about his own efforts to raise Tyler with proper values, about the constant struggle to teach integrity and kindness in a world that often rewarded neither. The idea that wealth and privilege could corrupt those lessons was both foreign and terrifying to him. I've spent the last 8 months trying to understand how I failed her so completely. Catherine continued. Living here, getting to know you and Tyler, learning what real community looks like, it's shown me everything I missed, everything I was too arrogant to see. Tyler looked at his father, seeing his own internal conflict reflected in Rob's expression. The woman standing before them was clearly in pain, clearly trying to change, but she'd also built their entire relationship on deception. How do you forgive someone for lying about who they are, even if their reasons were understandable? I should have told you the truth from the beginning, Catherine said, reading their hesitation correctly. I was scared that if you knew who I really was, you'd see me the way everyone else does, as someone who doesn't deserve kindness or friendship. And now? Rob asked. What happens now? Catherine wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders, summoning whatever dignity she had left. Now I accept that I've lost something precious because of my own cowardice. I'll leave you alone. I just wanted you to know that every moment we've shared has meant everything to me. You've taught me more about being human than 20 years of wealth and privilege ever did. She turned to leave, but Tyler's voice stopped her. Wait. Catherine looked back hopefully, but Tyler's expression remained guarded. I need to know something. When you were teaching me about college applications, when you said I was smart enough for any school I wanted, did you mean that? Or were you just being nice to the poor kid? I meant every word, Catherine replied without hesitation. You're one of the most intelligent, thoughtful young men I've ever met. Your father has raised someone extraordinary, and any college would be lucky to have you. Tyler studied her face, looking for signs of insincerity. What he found instead was the same genuine warmth and belief she'd always shown him. The realization that those interactions had been real, regardless of her deception about her background, created a crack in his defensive anger. "I need time to think," Tyler said finally. It's a lot." Catherine nodded understanding. "Of course. I'll be at my house if you want to talk more, and if you don't, I'll respect that too." After she left, Rob and Tyler sat at their kitchen table in contemplative silence. The muffins Catherine had brought sat untouched between them, a reminder of the domestic normalcy that had been shattered by revelation and confrontation. "What do you think?" Rob asked eventually. Tyler considered the question seriously, weighing his anger against his memories of their neighbor's kindness. "I think she was wrong about a lot of things, but I also think she might be telling the truth about trying to change." "People can change," Rob agreed. "The question is whether we can trust someone who started our relationship with lies, even if her reasons were understandable." "She could have kept lying," Tyler pointed out. "When I confronted her, she could have made up more stories. Instead, she told us the truth about her daughter." Rob nodded, having noticed the same thing. Catherine's admission about Emma's death and her role in shaping the values that led to it couldn't have been easy. There was a raw honesty to her grief that felt authentic in ways her previous explanations had not. "What would Mum have done?" Tyler asked, invoking the memory of the woman who'd been their moral compass before cancer took her away. Rob smiled sadly, remembering his wife's remarkable ability to see the potential for good in everyone. She would have said that people who recognize their mistakes are already halfway to fixing them, but she also would have been careful about protecting us while giving Catherine a chance to prove she's really changed. "So we don't just forgive her, but we don't shut her out completely either?" "We take it slow," Rob agreed. "We watch what she does, not just what she says. Real change shows up in actions over time." The decision felt right to both of them, though neither was entirely sure what it would look like in practice. They'd been betrayed by someone they'd come to care about, but they'd also been given a glimpse into the kind of pain that drives people to desperate reinvention. The challenge would be finding a way forward that honored both their hurt and their capacity for compassion. That evening, Tyler found himself staring out his bedroom window toward Catherine's house. The lights were on in her kitchen, and he could see her moving around, probably making dinner for one. For the first time since his discovery, he allowed himself to imagine what her life must actually be like, surrounded by wealth but isolated by grief, trying to become someone better while carrying the weight of past mistakes. 3 days passed before either Rob or Tyler knocked on Catherine's door. When they finally did, it was Tyler who initiated the contact, carrying a plate of his father's homemade cookies and wearing an expression of cautious determination. "I want to hear the whole story," he said when Catherine opened the door. "Not just the parts you think we can handle. If we're going to figure out how to be friends, I need to understand who you really are." Catherine's relief was visible, though she tried to maintain composure. "Are you sure? Some of it isn't pretty." "None of life is pretty," Tyler replied, channeling wisdom he'd learned through loss and hardship. "But Dad taught me that understanding people's whole story usually makes more sense than judging them by pieces of it." Over the next hour, Catherine told them everything. About growing up in a family where money was the primary measure of worth. About marrying Richard Sterling and embracing a lifestyle built on exclusion and superiority. About raising Emma to believe she was fundamentally different from and better than people who had less. She told them about the night Emma died, about the phone call that shattered her understanding of everything she'd believed about parenting and privilege, about the months of legal battles and media scrutiny that followed, and about the gradual realization that the person she'd been was someone she couldn't stand to be anymore. "I came here because I wanted to disappear," Catherine admitted. "But you and your father showed me that disappearing isn't enough. You have to figure out who you want to appear as instead. Rob listened to this confession with growing understanding. The woman describing her journey from privileged ignorance to painful awareness wasn't the same person who'd given those dismissive interviews about poor people deserving their circumstances. She was someone who'd been broken by loss and was trying to rebuild herself according to better principles. "The money," Tyler said eventually. "You still have all of it?" "Most of it," Catherine confirmed. "The divorce settlement is still being negotiated, but I'll come out of it with more wealth than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. And what are you planning to do with it?" Catherine looked surprised by the question, as if she hadn't fully considered the implications of her transformation. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've been so focused on learning how to be a decent person that I haven't thought about what decent people do with resources like mine." Tyler exchanged a look with his father, seeing an opportunity that hadn't existed before Catherine's revelation. Dad's been trying to figure out how to help other teachers who lost their jobs to budget cuts. And there are kids at my school who are as smart as anyone but can't afford college applications, let alone tuition. "You're suggesting I should give money away?" Catherine asked. "I'm suggesting you should use your money the way you've learned to use your time here," Rob replied. "To help people, to build community, to make a difference in ways that actually matter." The conversation that followed laid the groundwork for what would become the most meaningful collaboration of their lives. Catherine had resources, but no real understanding of how to use them effectively. Rob and Tyler had insight into the problems that actually needed solving, but no means to address them at scale. Together, they began planning something that would honor both Catherine's desire to change and address the root cause of her greatest regret. Not a traditional foundation, but an intensive program designed to prevent other wealthy families from making the same devastating mistakes Catherine had made with Emma. "We need to create what I wish had existed when Emma was Tyler's age," Catherine explained during one of their late-night planning sessions. "A place where privileged kids can learn what real life actually looks like, where they can develop empathy instead of entitlement." The Real Life Learning Academy took shape over months of careful planning. Catherine would fund the program, Rob would serve as director, drawing on his educational expertise to design curricula that challenged rather than coddled wealthy teenagers. Tyler would be their secret weapon, a peer mentor who could speak to privileged kids in ways adults couldn't. "The whole point is to strip away the bubble," Rob explained to their first group of parents. Wealthy families who'd been referred to by therapists, lawyers, or educators concerned about their children's development. "Your kids will spend 6 weeks learning practical skills, working alongside people from different backgrounds, and confronting the reality that money doesn't make them better than anyone else." The program was deliberately uncomfortable. Participants lived in modest accommodations, prepared their own meals, and spent their days doing manual labor alongside Tyler and other young people from working-class backgrounds. No phones, no designer clothes, no access to credit cards or family wealth. "This is basically prison," complained Madison, a 16-year-old whose father owned a chain of luxury hotels during her first week. "Prison doesn't teach you how to fix fences or grow vegetables," Tyler replied calmly. "This teaches you how to be useful." The program wasn't without its challenges. Catherine struggled with watching privileged teenagers experience the same resistance to accountability that Emma had shown. Some parents withdrew their children when the reality of the program became clear, preferring to maintain their family's comfortable illusions rather than confront difficult truths. But for those who stayed, the transformations were remarkable. Kids who'd never been told no learned to accept criticism and failure. Teenagers who'd been raised to believe they were special discovered the satisfaction of earning respect through effort rather than inheritance. Tyler found himself uniquely qualified to mentor these students. He understood both struggle and dignity, could speak to them about real friendship versus transactional relationships, and demonstrated daily that happiness didn't require wealth. His natural empathy, combined with his unwillingness to be impressed by money, made him an ideal bridge between their world and reality. "Why do you even care about helping us?" asked Connor, whose family owned pharmaceutical companies, during a particularly difficult counseling session. "We're everything you probably hate about rich people, because I learned that people can change." Tyler replied, "My neighbor taught me that. She used to think exactly like you do, and now she's one of the best people I know. But she had to lose everything that mattered to her before she figured it out. We're trying to save you from having to learn that lesson the hard way." Rob watched these interactions with professional satisfaction and personal pride. Tyler had developed into an exceptional educator in his own right, understanding instinctively how to challenge students without destroying their confidence. The academy was succeeding not just in changing privileged teenagers' perspectives, but in revealing Tyler's own remarkable gifts as a teacher and counselor. Catherine found the work both healing and heartbreaking. Each breakthrough with a student felt like a small redemption for her failures with Emma, while each resistance reminded her of conversations with her daughter that she'd handled poorly. The program forced her to relive her mistakes while providing a chance to prevent others from repeating them. "I keep seeing Emma in these kids," Catherine confided to Rob during one of their evening debriefs. "The same entitled attitudes, the same casual cruelty toward people they consider beneath them. Sometimes I wonder if we're asking too much of a 6-week program." "Change takes time," Rob reminded her, "but awareness is the first step. These kids are leaving here with questions they never had before. That's something." The academy's success attracted attention from private schools, family therapists, and even judges dealing with wealthy teenagers in legal trouble. Word spread through elite circles about a program that actually held rich kids accountable for their behavior and attitudes. 1 year after opening, they received a visit from Dr. Patricia Morse, a psychiatrist who specialized in treating affluent families. She'd been following their work and wanted to discuss collaboration on what she called affluenza rehabilitation. "What you're doing here addresses something the therapeutic community has struggled with for decades," Dr. Morse explained during her tour of the academy. "Wealthy families often enable destructive behaviors while shielding their children from consequences. Your program provides the reality testing that traditional therapy can't replicate." The partnership that emerged combined Catherine's resources, Rob's educational expertise, Tyler's peer mentoring, and Dr. Morse's clinical insights. Together, they developed a comprehensive approach to addressing what Catherine had come to think of as privilege poisoning, the psychological damage that extreme wealth could inflict on young people when not properly managed. Tyler had been accepted to several excellent colleges, ultimately choosing a program that would allow him to study both psychology and education. His plan was to return to the academy after graduation, bringing formal training to complement the intuitive understanding he'd developed through his work with privileged teenagers. "I want to understand the science behind what we're doing," Tyler explained to Catherine as he prepared for his freshman year. "Why some kids can be reached and others can't. What makes the difference between entitlement and confidence, how families can use wealth responsibly instead of destructively." Catherine looked at him with wonder, remembering the angry 16-year-old who'd confronted her about her deception just 2 years earlier. Tyler had found his calling in work that emerged directly from their unlikely friendship, creating a career path that honored both his natural empathy and his hard-won understanding of privilege and its discontents. Rob had returned to education in a way he'd never imagined, running a school that challenged students not with academic rigor but with moral complexity. The academy had become his masterpiece, a place where teaching meant more than transferring information. It meant transforming character. On a warm autumn evening, the three of them sat in Catherine's backyard, reviewing applications from families seeking spots in the academy's next session. The demand had grown beyond their capacity. forcing them to develop waiting lists and selection criteria that prioritized the students most in need of intervention. "Look at this one," Tyler said, reading from an application. 17-year-old who crashed his third Ferrari and told the judge that traffic laws don't apply to people with trust funds. "Classic case," Rob agreed. "Parents probably want us to fix him without actually changing anything about their family dynamics." Catherine studied the file, seeing echoes of her own parenting mistakes in the family's description of their son's behavior. "We'll take him, but only if the parents agree to counseling too. The kids can't maintain changes if they're returning to the same toxic environment." This had become their standard approach, recognizing that privilege poisoning was a family disease that required systemic intervention. Parents often resisted this requirement, preferring to see their children's problems as individual failings rather than symptoms of dysfunctional family cultures. The Academy's most powerful tool had proven to be its location in Rob and Tyler's neighborhood. Wealthy students found themselves interacting daily with working-class families, learning that intelligence, kindness, and dignity weren't correlated with bank accounts. These interactions, carefully facilitated by Tyler and other peer mentors, shattered assumptions that years of privilege had reinforced. "The best moment," Tyler told Catherine, "is when they realize that my neighbors aren't projects to be pitied or problems to be solved. They're just people living their lives with as much complexity and purpose as anyone else." 2 years after the Academy's founding, Catherine received a letter that made her cry for hours. It was from Emma's former best friend, Clara, whose parents had enrolled her in the program after she'd been expelled from prep school for bullying scholarship students. "I know Emma would want me to tell you something," Clara wrote. "She used to talk about how scared she was of disappointing you, how she felt like she had to be perfect because of who your family was. She knew the things you taught her about being better than other people were wrong, but she didn't know how to tell you. I think this Academy would have saved her, and I know it saved me." Catherine shared the letter with Rob and Tyler, finally understanding that Emma's death hadn't been just about drunk driving or reckless behavior. It had been about a young woman trapped by expectations and privileges she'd never asked for, unable to find a way to be human in a world that demanded she be superhuman. She was trying to tell me, Catherine realized. All those times she pushed boundaries or acted out, she was trying to show me that the person I was raising her to be wasn't who she wanted to become. The Academy's success had attracted national attention, leading to documentary coverage and speaking engagements that Catherine approached with careful consideration. She was willing to share their story, but only in ways that honored Emma's memory while protecting the privacy of the students they served. Tyler found himself in demand as a speaker at conferences about youth development and class consciousness. His perspective as someone who'd bridged different worlds made him uniquely qualified to discuss both the damage that privilege could cause and the possibility of healing it through authentic human connection. The Real Life Learning Academy's 3rd anniversary was marked not by a community celebration, but by a quiet ceremony at Emma's grave. Catherine, Rob, and Tyler stood together beside the headstone, surrounded by letters from Academy graduates who'd gone on to use their privileges responsibly. "We did it," Catherine said quietly, addressing her daughter's memory. "We found a way to break the cycle. We're teaching other kids what I should have taught you. That being special means using your gifts to lift others up, not to separate yourself from them." Tyler placed flowers on Emma's grave, roses that he'd grown himself in the Academy's garden. "She would have loved the Academy," he told Catherine. "She would have been an amazing peer mentor." Rob watched this exchange with the satisfaction of an educator who'd witnessed profound transformation. The Academy had become more than a program. It was a living testament to the possibility of redemption and the power of education to heal intergenerational wounds. As they walked back to their cars, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A fence repair that had seemed like simple neighborly kindness had evolved into work that was literally saving lives, preventing other families from experiencing the devastation she'd endured. "What's next?" Tyler asked, thinking about his upcoming college graduation and return to the academy as a full-time staff member. "We scale up," Catherine replied. "Open academies in other cities, train other educators in our methods, create a network of programs that can address privilege poisoning wherever it occurs. And we keep fixing fences," Rob added with a smile, "because sometimes the smallest acts of service lead to the biggest transformations." The fence between their properties still stood, weathered but solid, a reminder that good boundaries could create connection rather than separation. But now it also served as part of the academy's campus, where privileged teenagers learned to maintain and repair things with their own hands, discovering dignity in labor and satisfaction in honest work. Catherine's transformation from entitled socialite to dedicated educator had taken 3 years, but Tyler understood that the real timeline was measured not in calendar months, but in lives changed. Each academy graduate who returned to their wealthy family with new values and perspectives created ripple effects that would influence future generations. Emma's death had shattered Catherine's understanding of everything she'd believed about parenting and privilege, but from that devastation had grown something beautiful and lasting, a place where other parents' children could learn the lessons Emma had died trying to teach her mother. The academy was Emma's legacy, proof that even the most tragic losses could be transformed into sources of healing and hope. "Then yes," he said to Sophia. "Let's see how big this thing can grow." As they prepared to leave the art center, David took one last look around the space that had become the physical embodiment of his father's legacy. Students' artwork covered the walls, scholarship announcements filled a bulletin board near the entrance, and the faint scent of paint and possibility hung in the air like incense in a cathedral. Outside, the bronze plaque caught the late afternoon sunlight, casting shadows that made the engraved words seem to dance. Robert Matthews Art Center, dedicated to the belief that every person has something beautiful to offer the world. Emma skipped ahead toward the car, clutching her framed drawing and chattering about the mural techniques she'd learned. Sophia walked beside David in comfortable silence, both of them processing the magnitude of what they'd built together. "Do you think he knows?" Sophia asked as they reached the parking lot. "Somehow, do you think your father knows what grew from those art lessons he gave me?" David considered the question seriously, watching his daughter dance around the car with the boundless energy of a completely healthy child. "Dad used to say that love never really dies. It just finds new ways to express itself. Looking at Emma, looking at what we've created together, looking at all those kids in there discovering they have gifts worth sharing." He paused, feeling the truth of it settle into his bones. "Yeah, I think he knows, and I think he's proud of all of us." The drive home took them through the heart of their small city, past the community bank where this entire journey had begun. David glanced at the building as they passed, remembering the desperate man who'd sat in that vinyl chair just 7 months ago, clutching medical bills and facing impossible choices. That man had been so focused on what he couldn't provide for his daughter that he'd nearly missed the most important lesson his father had tried to teach him: that accepting help isn't a sign of weakness. It's a recognition of the interconnectedness that makes meaningful life possible. "Daddy," Emma said from the back seat, breaking into his thoughts. "When I grow up, I want to help run the foundation. Is that okay?" "More than okay," David replied, catching her eyes in the rearview mirror. "But you don't have to decide that now. You have lots of time to figure out what you want to be." "I already know," Emma said with the matter-of-fact certainty that only children can muster. "I want to be like Grandpa Robert. I want to help people see how beautiful they are." And there it was. David realized. The true measure of his father's success. the ultimate validation of every choice Robert Matthews had made during his 30 years of teaching. Not the galleries or foundations or bronze plaques, but the simple desire of a 9-year-old girl to continue the work of helping people recognize their own worth. As they pulled into their driveway, David felt a profound sense of completion, as if the circle that had begun with his father's kindness to a struggling teenager had finally found its way home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to expand the foundation's reach, new chances to honor Robert's memory through action rather than words. But tonight, as Emma hung her grandfather's drawing in the place of honor above their fireplace, and Sophia joined them for a simple dinner of homemade soup and store-bought bread, David Matthews understood that he was living inside his father's greatest masterpiece, a life dedicated to the radical proposition that everyone deserves to be seen, valued, and given the chance to flourish. The fluorescent lights of Riverside Community Bank seemed less harsh now when David visited to make the foundation's quarterly deposits. The loan officer who'd rejected his application 7 months earlier always greeted him with genuine warmth, having watched the local news coverage of the Art Center's opening and the foundation's expanding work. "Ah, hard to believe it all started in this lobby," she'd remarked during his last visit, gesturing toward the spot where he'd first encountered Sophia Smith. "Best rejection I ever received," David had replied, and meant it completely. Because sometimes the word no is just the universe's way of pointing you toward a much bigger yes, one that includes not just your own dreams, but the dreams of everyone whose life you're meant to touch along the way. The children had adapted to their parents' partnership with the resilience that made adults envious and hopeful in equal measure. Grace and Noah had become genuine friends, bonding over their shared experience of having parents who built things and their mutual pride in being part of a story that had ended well despite its difficult beginning. They'd helped design elements of the playground at the new Oakland schools, insisting on features that would be both fun and safe, and their input had reminded the adults that the ultimate purpose of construction was to create spaces where life could flourish. On the anniversary of the Riverside earthquake, Ethan and Alexandra had stood together at the site where the old school had once stood, now marked by a memorial garden honoring the resilience of the community that had survived the disaster. The inscription on the central monument read simply, "In memory of lessons learned and lives protected." And both of them understood that their own relationship had become part of that larger story of growth through adversity. Grace and Noah had placed flowers at the memorial, their easy friendship serving as proof that even the most complicated adult conflicts could be resolved when people chose love over pride. The question Grace had asked in the hospital waiting room, "Did you know this was going to happen?" had evolved from an innocent inquiry into something deeper and more challenging. Ethan had finally answered her honestly, explaining that he'd been worried about the building's safety, but hadn't been able to convince the grown-ups to listen to his concerns. Grace had processed this information with the directness that children brought to complex moral questions, concluding that sometimes adults made mistakes, but that what mattered most was learning to do better next time. Her simple wisdom had become a guiding principle for the new company, where every decision was evaluated not just for its immediate benefits, but for its long-term consequences on the people who would live and work in the buildings they created. As Ethan watched the sun set over San Francisco Bay from the office he now shared with Alexandra, he reflected on the journey that had brought them from adversaries to partners, from a professional disagreement that had cost him his career, to a collaboration that had given both of them a deeper sense of purpose. The city's skyline was dotted with buildings he'd helped design over the years, each one representing someone's vision of a better future made manifest in steel and concrete. But the structure he was most proud of wasn't visible from his office window. It was the trust he and Alexandra had rebuilt between them, the friendship their children had forged despite their parents' complicated history, and the commitment they'd made to ensure that integrity would never again be treated as a luxury in their professional lives. The phone on his desk buzzed with a text message from Noah, asking if Grace could come over for dinner and help with a science project about earthquake-resistant building design. Ethan smiled as he typed back his agreement, then looked across the office at Alexandra, who was reviewing plans for their latest project with the kind of intense focus that had once intimidated him. Now he recognized it as the expression of someone who understood that getting the details right could mean the difference between safety and catastrophe, between protecting families and destroying them. She looked up and caught him watching her, and her smile carried the warmth of someone who'd learned that being right wasn't nearly as important as being trusted. "Some people think integrity is a luxury," he'd said on that terrible day when everything changed. But time had proven that integrity was actually the foundation upon which everything worthwhile was built, and sometimes the most expensive choices turned out to be the ones that created the most value in the end. Grace and Noah's laughter drifted up from the street below, where they were playing in the small park that had been built to replace the demolished elementary school, and Ethan knew that every difficult decision he'd made had been worth it to hear that sound of children who felt safe enough to play without fear. In the growing dusk of a Millbrook evening, walking toward a future that held promise instead of just survival, Tom understood that some stories don't end with loss, but begin with it, using grief as a foundation for joy that runs deeper because it acknowledges the cost of loving fully. Grace's laughter echoed off the cemetery walls like music, and Maggie's hand in his felt like coming home to a place he'd never known existed. Anna's gift to them hadn't been a replacement for what they'd lost, but an expansion of what they'd thought possible. Love that multiplied instead of diminished, hope that grew stronger because it had been tested by the worst life could offer. The paint box sat safely in Grace's backpack, no longer a relic of the past, but a tool for creating futures Anna could only have dreamed of, colors mixed with intention and applied with the confidence that comes from understanding that beauty is not diminished by sadness but made more precious because of it. The last visitors departed as darkness settled over the city, leaving the gallery space peaceful and warm in the glow of carefully positioned lighting that accommodated various sensory processing needs. Ruby had fallen asleep curled up next to her latest color study, while Jasper continued working on mathematical calculations for their next collaborative project. Zoe was reading quietly in a corner, occasionally looking up to observe the comfortable domesticity of their unconventional family gathering. Helena began the gentle process of transitioning the children toward home and bedtime routines, her movements carrying the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to create structure without rigidity, accommodation without chaos. Benjamin gathered art supplies and turned off equipment, his hands moving through familiar patterns that had become meditative rather than merely functional. As they prepared to leave the gallery space that had become the visible symbol of their commitment to honoring neurodivergent gifts, Benjamin paused to look once more at the children's collaborative installation. The piece seemed to pulse with its own internal light, geometric patterns and flowing colors, creating a visual representation of minds working together in harmony rather than competition. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, funding applications and research collaborations, therapeutic sessions with children whose gifts hadn't yet been recognized, conversations with educators and parents who were beginning to understand that different didn't necessarily mean deficient. But tonight, surrounded by the quiet evidence of healing and creativity and love that had emerged from their willingness to risk authentic connection, Benjamin Mitchell felt the deep satisfaction of someone who'd finally learned to stop hiding from his own gifts and the people who needed them most. The drive home through the quiet city streets was filled with the comfortable silence of a family that had learned to communicate through presence as much as words, their different ways of processing and expressing emotion woven together into something resilient and beautiful and entirely their own. And in the peaceful breathing of children who finally felt safe enough to sleep deeply, Benjamin could hear the echo of Luna's voice, reminding him that the most important art was always the kind that helped other people remember they weren't alone in the world.